Chase Phillips is the first vice president with Merrill Lynch, wealth management, and a senior financial advisor. And his colleague, Will Jeffrey, who he's kindly invited, and he gave up a Sunday morning to come as well. We have Matthew Bogin, who is a special needs attorney in the area, and he is known for being a passionate and fiercely advocate for families and for those with special needs. And Simon, many of you all know Simon Cantos because he is of our community, and besides being a world-class van adapter, he is also knowledgeable and will share his journey, his own personal journey. I want to start though with a little story about Chase. In putting this conference together, all of us worked very hard. And in our thousands of phone calls, we asked for help or donations or products. And there were a lot of no's along the way. And when we reached Chase, the first thing that came out of his mouth was, "How can I help? Where do you want me to be? What do you want me to do?" And I think that says a lot about his character. He's just had a baby. He's got another little toddler at home, and yet here he is with us for free on a Sunday morning. So I thank him dearly. But I will hand the mic now over to Chase. I'm going to be walking from table to table. I'm going to be handing out a sign-up sheet. If you would like to get on his email, he will be able to email you some information. Janet will also tell you another way that you can do that, and I will be putting some cards on this table. So again, thank you so much.
Thanks, Robin. I think I've got a mic here. Oh. Thank you. Okay, are we live? I think we are. Okay. So good morning. Good morning. How's everybody doing? Good. We got the coffee flowing. It's nice and early. Fantastic, fantastic. First and foremost, I want to give a big thank you. I want to give a big thank you to the parents that are here, because you guys go through a lot. You go through a tremendous amount, and I was born with spina bifida, and without my parents, not sure kind of where I'd be. They gave me all the tools that I needed, and every single day you guys are giving the tools to your kids and loved ones that they need to thrive out in this community. And your kids won't thank you enough, and I still don't thank my mom and dad enough, and they still are all over me. I'm now in my 30s, and they're telling me what to do, and it's like, okay.
Sounds like my parents.
So I want to thank my parents, but I want to thank you all for being here. So, it's a big topic that we're talking about today, right? It's planning for the long haul, right? Planning financially. Will there be enough money? Who will be in your loved one's life when you're gone as parents? What does the future look like? What does the future hold? These are big topics. And so for today, what we're going to talk about are some of the legal aspects to that planning. We've got Matthew Bogin here, who's a renowned special needs attorney here in the area, has been practicing for over 30 years. We're going to be talking about the financial aspects of the plan. I run the special needs group at Merrill Lynch in Washington, D.C., and work with families every day on these topics. But there's also going to be a personal tilt to this conversation, and I hope you guys will find some inspiration over some of the stories as well. We've got Simon Cantos, a living, breathing example of somebody who's thriving out in the community, working as an engineer, doing awesome things. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story as well. The other thing is, I want this to be a bit of a dialogue. We've left adequate time at the end, so think about your questions now. Let's have a conversation going. We have a wonderful big audience here in the room, so let's really take advantage of that because you guys all have questions, and we're here as a panel to help you answer them or give you some guidance in the right direction. And then the emails are going around. I'm going to send you a suite of materials that includes a calculator, a special needs workbook, a timeline that goes over items you should be prioritizing at different ages, information about benefits, information on the ABLE Act, which is a really hot topic right now, ABLE accounts. So there's going to be a lot of good material that goes out. So please sign up, and we'll get everything out to you. Okay, so before I get into some of the nuts and bolts of the planning, and I'm going to talk about what I consider the 4 pillars of a successful financial plan, I just want to give you a little bit of background about my story, how I got to where I am, and kind of what I've seen along the way. Going back to my parents, so I was born in this area in the mid-'80s, and I was born with spina bifida, which is a neurological birth defect. And when I was born, the doctor took me out of my mother's arms, and I was sent up to Children's Hospital here in DC. And I remember my mom telling me how hard it was. And she goes, it was extremely hard to grasp what the future was going to look like for you, Chase. And in the first 2 days, I was really, really sad. I didn't know what to do. And then she said, what really helped me was the fact that I started thinking about how I could start planning. What could I be doing? I need to start executing on something. So I started making appointments. I started seeing specialists. I started communicating with other families in the area. A lot of the things that you all are doing. She said it really helped with overcoming this overwhelming feeling that I now have a child with a disability. Right? It's hard. Every one of you remembers the day that you found out that your loved one had a disability, or if you're disabled yourself, when you were given a diagnosis or born with it. So how do we take that in? And so my folks were phenomenal with me, with getting me just to go along with the flow and get me involved with things that my peers were doing. I remember spending time at my friend's house, and my friends would go down the stairs really fast, and of course I'm on crutches and I can't go down the stairs and keep up with them. And the friend's mom said, hey, Scott, you need to wait for Chase. He can't get down the stairs as fast as you. And my mom told her, she goes, you know what, the world's not going to wait for Chase. We're going to get him what he needs, but the world's not going to wait for him. And that was huge for me, because I realized that I was going to have to figure things out, albeit it's going to be a different way than everybody else does it, and have my own considerations to deal with in life. But that really helped me. And so I was able to really kind of focus all of my attention into sports. I played baseball, and then soccer and swimming, and then finally in high school I found a sport that I could compete in that put me on the same level as everybody else. I was a coxswain on the rowing team in high school. Made the top boat, and then I was recruited by the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and made the team there. Was on the rowing team for 4 years in college, and then made the U.S. national team, and traveled to Belgium and Japan to represent my country, and was one spot removed from making an Olympic team. So my point to that is, I think for whatever it is you're doing, whether it be sports or music or some other hobby, you start focusing your attention on things that aren't going to define you by the disability, but rather what defines you and what your passions are. And then the disability, it becomes rather trivial. We have to deal with it, but to gain the confidence that we need to thrive in life, focusing our passions to something that's not defining us by our disability is extremely important. Okay, so that's just a little bit about me. All of that helped me kind of get to where I am at Merrill Lynch and helping people on a day-to-day basis. So now I want to talk just a little bit about, why you guys are here, and giving you some tools that you need to take these next steps with planning, right? The biggest difference between your kind of general financial planning and legal planning and planning for a loved one with a disability is you're planning for 2 generations at one time. And I was talking to one of the participants about this just before we started. We're all going to predecease our kids, hopefully, right? There's going to be a point in time when, as parents, we're not going to be around. And so we're going to need to have provided for our loved ones and given them all the tools that they need to go and kick butt in this world, right? So there are 4 pillars. There are 4 pillars, and we're going to talk about them, that go into every consideration of planning. Okay, 4 pillars. And sorry, it's DC, so I have an acronym for it. I apologize, there's a million acronyms. But the acronym is GLFF. You can pronounce it GELF, that's just how I remember it, GLFF. And it stands for G for government benefits. And this is a good item, I think, to write down, right? If you're going to take something away, it's a good one to write down. So G for government benefits, L for legal planning, F for family communication, and F for financial. And by the way, I like to get my laps in up here. Keeps me going, keeps the blood pumping. Okay, so how do we drill down on these different items? And this is really the framework for what we're going to talk about. And Matthew's going to talk about it in more depth. Simon's going to talk about a little bit about his situation. Let's dive into each one of these. Government benefits first. You all hear a lot about government benefits. And it's a big, long, confusing sea of information, right? So the way I would think about benefits is in 3 parts. You've got your federal benefits, you've got your state benefits, and you've got your local benefits. And I know you all come from different backgrounds and different places, so every locale is going to be different, of course, with benefits. But let's talk federal first, because you all have access to these benefits. So on the federal side, depending upon the disability, depending upon the severity, and of course there's some gray area here, we have something called SSI, right? Supplemental Security Income. And SSI is an income stream that most families are eligible for when your child turns 18. And that's $733 per month. And that, of course, you think about that, and that's not a lot of money for somebody to live on, and of course that's not the only piece that we can count on to live on, but it is a benefit. And with SSI, we're automatically qualified for Medicaid. And Medicaid is a health insurance provided by the federal government. It is means tested, just as SSI is means tested. But with SSI, you get access to Medicaid. And Medicaid is the barrier of entry for many other local programs, waivers and things of that nature, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So at your most basic level, you have SSI and Medicaid. These are federal. Federal benefits, although Medicaid's run through each individual state, and there's some caveats there. But okay, so then you got the state benefits. So Medicaid is administered through the states, and the states have waiver programs. And these programs can pay for a number of different things, from some states housing, assistive technology, caregivers, respite care, number of different programs that exist all over the country. And again, having access to Medicaid is your barrier of entry to getting your Medicaid waivers. So here's another takeaway. If you have a Medicaid waiver in your state and you think you're eligible for it, call. So in Maryland, it's DDA. In DC, it's DDS. Call your local disability advocacy groups and ask about them, because the waiting lists on these are long. It's a funding issue now more than ever. So in many cases, these waiting lists are 10 years plus long. So if you have young kids, this would be the first thing that I would be looking into, is your waivers and what's available and how can I get access to some of that funding. Okay, then you have local benefits. We all have advocacy groups and nonprofits in our area. Get to know them, because individual nonprofits can have programs that they've actually established from the constituents and donors that are participating in the organizations. Locally, there are programs like I can think of an organization here in Virginia that does mini grants. And so these are pockets, $10,000, $15,000 mini grants that are used to pay for different items. And you apply through them through the nonprofit itself. It's not through the state, it's not through the federal government, it's through the nonprofit. So look for different opportunities, funding opportunities that might be available to you. I mean, a lot of families are getting together to form their own group homes, right? Living communities that have all the resources that a loved one would need to thrive. Ask about these programs, see who's doing what, be a part of it. Okay? So benefits are key. Federal, state, and local. break it down in that, and I think that'll help keep it a little simpler for you. All right. So we know that benefits are means tested, and I'm going to be the first one to tell you the system was set up 50 years ago or more. It's not a perfect system, and the advocacy is a whole nother thing, and I'm very passionate about it. But to receive some of these benefits, the rules are that you can't have money, which is backwards. So for SSI, you can't have more than $2,000 in your name as a disabled individual. That's why most people with disabilities aren't eligible until they're 18, because prior to age 18, you're on your parents, you're a dependent of your parents. But once you turn 18, there are ways to structure assets so that you can qualify for benefits, and this is the legal side. All right? So legal planning, good legal planning, and Matthew's going to talk more about this. Good legal planning will help us access benefits and still have money, right? Because we can't live on just $733 a month. Medicaid's a big benefit, but what else do we need to be setting aside? So these means tests are important. So you've probably heard of something called a special needs trust. Raise your hand if you've heard of a special needs trust. Okay, a good segment of the room has heard of special needs trust. So for those that haven't heard of special needs trust, special needs trusts are is a way that a family or a disabled individual can put money over and above the $2,000 asset ceiling away and still have access to these means tested benefits, SSI and Medicaid, and the waivers. So a special needs trust can hold an unlimited amount of money, and that money can be used for the benefit of the person living with a disability. And they can tap into their benefits. Okay, so a well-drafted special needs trust is extremely important to this planning. Matthew's going to talk a little bit about considerations for that. Who's the trustee? So who will control the trust? What kinds of things can a trust pay for? What assets do we leave to a trust? How do we structure assets to go to a trust? What about beneficiary designations and estate plans? Did you guys know that 70% of this country doesn't have a will? So, yeah, it's...
Glad I could help.
It is. And so, if there's one thing that you're going to do first with your planning, before anything else, is have your legal house in order. So will, power of attorney, medical directives, and maybe a special needs trust depending upon the situation of your family. It's critical for you. It's not fair that if you pass away before your kids, which hopefully we're all going to pass away before our kids, it's not fair for them. So if there's something, we've got 7 months, 6 months, 5 months. 5.5 months till the end of the year. If you haven't done it, I would make a priority to get it done this year. It's really important. I'm all over my clients to get it done. In fact, before even coming to see me, I'll say, look, you have to get your legal planning started before you can see me. Or you have to have it going and then you can see me. Okay, so legal is really important. Guardianship is another hot topic. Is it a right for your family? Is it not? Matthew's going to talk about it. Okay. Family planning. So we've talked about government benefits. We've talked about legal. Now we've got family planning. Families can be a wonderful blessing in our lives, right? Family can really help. A lot of families say, hey, grandmom and granddad want to help out. How can they help? What about other family that's going to be in our loved one's life when we're gone as parents? That's a consideration. Family can be a tremendous blessing, but if not planned right, family can be very difficult too. So I think communicating your game plan with family is extremely important. And there's a document that you all can be creating called a letter of intent. And if you are an individual living with a disability, this is a document that you can write. It's not a legal document. And it basically puts your passions, your day-to-day routine, your professionals, and any other information that a successor caretaker would need to know. Like for me, I have skin breakdown issues. Cushioning for me is critical. Someone would need to know that. My business partner, Mark, has a son who won't take takes medicine for seizures, and he won't take the medicine unless there's strawberry jam on the pill. And his son's nonverbal. If his caretaker didn't know about that detail, the caretaker would have an extraordinarily hard time. And I always say, as parent, no one's going to fill your shoes as parents. I mean, it's impossible, but you can give somebody a fighting chance by having a properly drafted letter of intent. The letter of intent doesn't have to be fancy. It can be a Word document. It can be on a legal pad of paper. What's important is that you get something down and that you share it with whomever's going to be in your loved one's life. That's something you can work on if you're flying home tonight. Pull up your phone on a little note app and start jotting things down. Or if you've got a spiral notebook or a legal pad, just jot your day down. And when you get home, record your day as you move through it. Beneficiary designations. Okay, so retirement assets, 401ks, and life insurance, all of this stuff passes outside of your will. Make sure if you have a special needs trust, the trust is updated on your beneficiary document. Because if you leave money outright to somebody who's receiving benefits, they may lose their benefits. And that's something that people overlook constantly. I'm a beneficiary sheriff. I say, look, you've got all this estate planning done, but you haven't updated any of your beneficiary documents. So the beneficiary designation supersedes your will, so the money you have in that 401k, that goes outright to your loved one. That's going to be a major problem. It can be fixed. It can be fixed, but it's, as Matt could tell you, it's not easy necessarily, and you lose the benefits for a period of time. Okay, financial, big topic. How do we know how much to set aside? Simon's going to talk a little bit about how he's been able to tap into some advocacy resources in his own situation to get on the right track financially, and he's thriving. But how do we do it? Where do we start? How much do we set aside? I think the first thing you need to do is think about, number one, what does the kind of the day-to-day budget look like? It's really hard for families to get a grasp of what they're spending, but your typical family who has a loved one with a disability spends $30,000 to $50,000 more than your typical family. Okay? So if we're looking to leave an income stream for our kids, every $50,000 of income that individual will need is $1 million that you need to have set aside for them. The math is you have a 5% withdrawal rate, a sustainable 5% withdrawal rate on any asset. You can realistically withdraw 5% from your asset base over time. So when you pass away, you have a residual estate. If there's $500,000 in that residual estate, that's $25,000 of income. Maybe that's enough, maybe it isn't. It depends upon your situation. So the first step to this is to take a budget of what you're spending. If your kids are old enough and you know what housing costs are, then you need to factor that in too. So in that email that I send out, there's going to be a budget worksheet in there. So you can take an inventory of what the dollars look like, right? And you can start to get a sense of what it's going to be. So if it's $50,000, it's $1 million. If it's $100,000, it's $2 million. And that's an overwhelming number. It is. And I could see the entire room kind of take a deep breath. It's hard to think about that. So the next step from there is to determine what assets will be available when I'm gone. You've got your retirement assets, 401ks, 403bs, IRAs, government employees, TSP. Anybody in the military? Anybody in the military?
Over there.
Okay, survivor benefits. SBP is a big program. That money can go into a special needs trust. Think about assets that will flow in. What about grandparents? What about aunts and uncles? How else can they help? Have you had conversations with them? Okay? The value of your home. A lot of Americans, most of their net worth is tied up in the value of their home. So when you pass away, that could be an asset. If your house is worth $300,000, okay, that's $15,000 of income right there. So take an inventory of everything. And then one way that a lot of families will supplement wealth, they say, look, Chase, I've got all this money set aside for my own retirement. If I don't use it, I'm not going to be okay. What do I do? A lot of families will utilize life insurance as a way to create a large sum of money at their death, right? So for a smaller amount of money per year, you can create a large nest egg to fund a special needs trust. It might be right for your family, it might not. It really depends upon your situation. I don't blindly recommend life insurance to everybody, but it could be a good way to supplement your estate. So maybe you know you're going to be able to leave $300,000 or $400,000, but million is the magic number that you need to leave because $50,000 is the income threshold. Well, then we need to look at maybe supplementing with $600,000 of permanent life insurance to fund your trust. Okay, so we talked about some nuts and bolts. Government, legal, family, financial. I kind of want to shift gears and get into some more kind of personal stories, and I want to turn the mic over to Simon Cantos, who's an awesome example of kicking butt, excuse my French, in our community. So,
it's all good.
Simon, it's all yours, man.
All right. Well, hey. Hello, everybody. All right. I know that I'm supposedly some vehicle expert, but I do have a day job. I work as an inside sales engineer at Carrier Corporation. What that is I basically design air conditioning systems for big buildings, not a house. So don't ask me about how to fix up your air conditioning in your house. I don't do that. I do big stuff like this entire hotel and large stuff like that. But anyways, it is my day job. Somehow, some way, I still manage to keep some benefits so that I can still work and still drive to work and get a vehicle and all that. I know some people yesterday at the session I did yesterday were asking about the finances to get a vehicle. It is expensive. I'll run through some of the numbers. The cost for a vehicle, a lot of times if you have something with very advanced hand controls and a wheelchair conversion, which a lot of us may need, it can cost more than the car. I'll give you an example with my current vehicle. I paid $38,000 for just my vehicle. The cost to convert it and to get it adapted with my controls, the value was an estimated $61,000. Yeah, I heard a lot of people going, whoa, yeah. Now, my insurance for my vehicle has to cover all of it. So I have an insurance policy of $100,000 on a minivan. And it is not a Bentley. It is not a Lambo. I wish it was. Then I can go more than 2 miles an hour, but whatever. Now, luckily, Pennsylvania, there's the vocational rehab office. Pennsylvania somehow, luckily, will help cover the conversion and the adaptive controls. So luckily at the time when I got my vehicle, I wasn't really earning all that much. So they covered the whole thing. The only thing I had to pay for was the vehicle. Now, coupled that with my insurance, it was, really expensive at the time. So like my insurance policy was, my insurance premiums were about almost as much as my car payment, but luckily I switched to car insurance and saved a whole bunch of money. Now, I'm actually in the process of getting a new vehicle, hopefully in the next couple of years. And the costs are even more insane than they were with my current car. The estimated cost of the conversion that at least I received was something over $100,000. A friend of mine that I know, similar kind of physical condition and all that, she paid $22,000 for the van, and the conversion was something like $114,000. And she got the entire conversion and the adaptive controls all covered by OBR. I love Pennsylvania. Now, in terms of other benefits, like I receive nursing care, and I also have an attendant. The funding for that was somewhat complicated. It's a little difficult at first because the second I started working at Carrier, I got off of SSDI and I lost my benefits too. They realized that the second I started working. So I needed to find a way to still get funding for attendant care and still work at the same time. Oh, can you hear me now? Yeah. All right, cool. So I found out about this program called Medical Assistance for Workers with Disabilities, MAWD, MAWD. It is a, from what I remember, it is a state-funded program where I basically buy in to the program. So I pay this in addition to my insurance that I get from the office, from my work. So I think it was roughly like, wasn't that much. I think it was like roughly 125 a month or so. Now, the beauty about this was that it provided funding for my attendant care and my nursing care. Wonderful. It was a little bit of a struggle to get it. When I applied for that program through the my county assistance office, the lady who was responsible for taking in my info didn't realize that it would actually cover attendant care and nursing care. She basically said, like, if you apply to this program, you're not gonna get the funding for that. And I was like, yes, I will. She's like, no, you won't. I ended up calling my friend who was my disability advisor, and she's like, yes, you can get it. Here's the page, here's the paragraph, here's the line. Send it to her. Ended up doing that, and then she's like, I'm sorry, I didn't know, I was new. I'm like, I've been dealing with you for 8 months. You're not new. So, yeah, that excuse isn't gonna work. So luckily, I got approved for MAWD. I got it, and now I'm working. I got everything I need. I make enough to keep the lights on and all that, but not enough to retire, at least not yet. You know, I do have a decent 401k and other benefits and life insurance and secondary life insurance, and need to talk to you about maybe getting additional life insurance, but you know, we'll deal with that later. But it works. Did all right. 4 years later, I'm still working. I'm still doing okay, and still have my attendant care and still have my nursing care.
Okay. All right, so I want to introduce Matthew Bogin. Matthew has been practicing law in this area for well over 30 years. He's been around since the establishment of special needs trust accounts in 1993. So he's going to get up and talk about, to take a deeper dive on the legal side of the planning. So Matthew Bogin.
Thanks, Chase. Is this on? I guess it is. I can hear it. Okay, before I start, I have to actually really sound like a lawyer and say that I only practice in Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia. So everything I say is going to be about general principles, and for those of you in the other, whatever, 47, 48, whatever the math works out to, I don't know if anybody's from Puerto Rico, you need to talk to a lawyer in your area who knows these principles, okay? So I'm going to do a general talk. I'm also going to talk about things that most people would rather not talk about, which is their own disability and their own death. But, you know, it is what it is, so I'll try and not be too heavy and tell a couple of humorous stories. Okay, so I think Chase said that 70% of the population in the United States doesn't have a will. That includes people who absolutely need wills, which are parents. Because if you're a parent and you don't have a will, you're doing your children, whether they're disabled or, as a friend of mine says, plain kids, you're doing them a disservice. You know, pretty much everywhere, if if you nominate a guardian for your child in your will, and if either you're a single parent or whatever your family situation is, if there's not a second parent who's alive, then the court and others will respect your designation of a guardian. If you don't do that, then somebody has to go to court and spend time and money, and those are two things that people don't really like to spend. So if you're a parent, you absolutely and have a child under 18, you absolutely positively, no question, need a will, okay? You know, you can go to a lawyer, you can go to try and do it on LegalZoom, but most people screw up the execution, but you gotta do it because, as I said, you're doing a disservice to your children. You also have to plan for your own incapacity because the statistics show that over a period of time, a substantial amount of the population's going to be incapacitated either temporarily or permanently. So you need to make sure that you have something in place that can handle your financial affairs when you become disabled. Okay, that's aside and apart from what you need to do for your children. You need to have it for you. I had a case where a couple was divorcing, and my client was the wife, and I wasn't doing the divorce, but the husband either had early dementia or alcoholism, and it didn't make much difference because he couldn't function. And she didn't have a power of attorney which would allow her to transact business for him. And we wound up, and this is the truth, in court for a year. I mean, not every day, but in court for a year so that she could sell their house. And this is back, particularly in this area in 2006, 2007, house prices went through the roof, and they had literally about $1.5 million in equity in the house. She had to get appointed his guardian so she could sell the house to get money to take care of him. So you want to make sure that you plan for your own incapacity because, you know, somebody's going to get hit by a bus today. I like to make jokes about our metro system, but there are derailments all the time. You know, something's going to happen to somebody every day, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be dead, but it does mean that they're going to be disabled. So you really have to, you know, like the airline says, put on your mask first, okay? And then put on your kid's mask if the oxygen leaves. So you really need to think about that. You also need to think about somebody to make decisions about your health care when you can't. You know, hopefully people remember Terry Schiavo and the whole issue there, okay? It's not a really complicated document, but you need to do it. You need to say that my spouse can make decisions, or that my, you know, son who's a physician, or daughter who's a physician can make decisions. But you need to authorize somebody to do it because, you know, these documents aren't important until you need them. And then if you don't have them, it's a real problem. So even before we start talking about your children, you need to take care of yourself, okay? That's my real sermon for the day. All right, so we've got people from all over the country, and I also think that we probably have folks who are either themselves disabled to some degree or have children who are disabled to some degree, and there's a wide spectrum of disabilities. I'm going to go back to SSI for a second, which Chase touched on. That's a program administered by the Social Security Administration. It's not funded by payroll deductions. It's a separate authorization by Congress. And there are two qualifications. One is the applicant can't have more than $2,000 in his or her own available assets. So that's why it's hard, although there are plenty of children who get SSI, a lot of more don't get SSI because the parents' assets are deemed available to them when they turn 18. And the other is that the applicant has to be incapable of substantial gainful employment. That is a test that the Social Security Administration applies, sometimes rigorously, sometimes not rigorously. But that qualification puts a cap on the amount of money people can earn. I have clients who have children with developmental disabilities, for example, who work at the local grocery stores and doing bagging and other things, and have to watch carefully how much they make so they don't jeopardize their SSI benefits. And around here, in this area, but not everywhere, if someone is eligible for SSI, they're eligible for medical assistance, Medicaid. And for most people, that's a much more important benefit than the SSI, because $733 a month, around here really doesn't amount to much. In other places in the country, it's more meaningful. But the medical assistance provides for a range of services, and it's really important to keep the eligibility for Medicaid. Getting back to SSI for a second and eligibility, there's a principle of in-kind support. So I have clients whose disabled children live with them, and Social Security can reduce the benefit by up to 1/3 for in-kind support. And if the child pays rent to the parent, then the benefit gets restored. That depends on individuals' taxable situations, but the important point is to keep the SSI eligibility, okay? Because that's in most states, the doorway to other benefits. And while we're talking about Medicaid, I'm gonna slip out of my lawyer role and get back into a sermon for a second. I'm sure everybody knows what's going on about 3 miles away from here. And I got up early, so I read part of the Washington Post. George Will has a column praising a senator from Pennsylvania because his proposal is to cap Medicaid increases. And George Will says, well, Medicaid has grown much larger than the rate of the economy. And George Will, of all people, should know that there are more disabled people living longer, more people even older than I am living longer in nursing homes. And so to compare the rate of increase in Medicaid against the increase in the economy is false. And I don't want to jeopardize anybody's C3 exemption, but it would behoove everybody to call their elected representatives and tell them to cut it out. Okay, so let's get back to, it's serious business. The nursing home population gets larger every year. People with disabilities who 20 years ago wouldn't have survive, and Medicaid is really important. Okay, so let's talk about how you protect that eligibility, assuming it stays in place. Chase talked a little bit about special needs trust. So a trust is just a legal organization like a corporation. And there are two important roles. One is the trustee, and that's the person or people or corporation that runs the trust, that administers the trust. And then there's the beneficiary. And in the special needs situation, that is the person with a disability. So it's, if one is experienced, it's reasonably easy to set it up. It's a little harder as the years go by to administer it. So one of the key considerations that a parent of a child with a disability, setting up a special needs trust. And those are, I'm talking about what are called third-party special needs trusts. I'll talk about first-party in a little while if we have time, because we're going to want to save a lot of time for questions. Anyway, so one of the key issues in setting up the special needs trust and who's going to be the trustee. That, you know, my solution is often to find a family member or family members who care in either, I like to have both in the short term and the long term. So sometimes it's the parents, siblings, and then sometimes it's the child's siblings. And if there's enough money, try and pair them with an institution who's got experience. Now, the problem around here, and you know, maybe it's different other places, is that most institutions won't get involved unless there's close to $1 million. And again, you know, everything in this area is inflated. So even after the Great Recession, a lot of people have I have clients who literally bought their houses for $29,000 and now they're worth $1 million. So that figure is not always so difficult to reach, but sometimes it is. But you have to think carefully about who the trustees will be, at least at the first couple of levels. It's hard to project 40, 50, 60, 70 years, 80 years into the future, but you have to at least make a stab at it and try and think about people who will be interested in the child's welfare, as well as finding an institution that can administer things, because it's a pain in the neck to have to write checks and get bills, and the institutions are better set up for that. But they're also better set up for being a little harsh. So it's good to have a family member who has some control. All right, so those are what are called third-party special needs trusts. There's also a concept of a first-party special needs trust, and I don't know how relevant it is for this group, but I'll talk about it. Those are set up with the money from the person with the disability. So we often see those in automobile accidents, sometimes birth injuries, sometimes, to get back to what Chase said, intergenerational family non-planning. So grandma leaves the person with a disability $250,000, and what do you do? So the person is allowed to contribute to what's called a first-party special needs trust, but the problem or the issue is that in order for that person then to qualify for SSI and Medicaid, the trust has to say, at the death of the beneficiary, Medicaid gets paid back dollar for dollar for the benefits that it provided from the creation of the trust till the end. For most people, that's not a problem. I have a client whose daughter had a birth injury, and they got a malpractice settlement, and the child's about 48, maybe 49 by now, and the mom's still hanging on to $70,000, and she's spending money out of her own pocket, and I keep trying to explain to her that she ought to spend this so that if something happens, Medicaid doesn't get paid back. But anyway, so those are first-party special needs trusts. Now, depending on the, well, let me go back to special needs trust before I move on. So I don't like to serve as trustee. It's a problem with my insurance company and my liability insurance company and others in the bar, but I had one client whom I worked with for about 30 years. I used to do a substantial amount of work fighting school systems for appropriate education. Anyway, so I'd done that for them, and then we did the trust, and they were older, and we set up a special needs trust, and I agreed to be a successor trustee. So then Mom had an aneurysm and literally was dead before she hit the floor, and Dad had a progressive neurological condition. So, and he got pneumonia and passed away unexpectedly. Anyway, the point of the story is that they had in the trust bought an insurance policy. And that was really helpful because it provided almost an immediate source of cash that we could use for the beneficiary while we were settling the estates, because they died reasonably close together. Okay, so I try and convince most of my clients to have either the trust be a beneficiary or have the trust buy an insurance policy of whatever they can afford. I mean, I see some people who are 30, and they're both lawyers or doctors, and they have a reasonable amount of cash flow, and they have a child with a disability. And so at 30, it's a lot cheaper to buy the policy. But it's really important to have an immediate source of cash because, people who send you bills don't really want to wait for you to go through the probate process for 6, 9, or 12 months or more, depending on where you live. So that's just my bias and my experience. Okay, so let's get back to the kids for a second. Depending on the individual's disability, it's important to have, in most places, I think everywhere in the country, when you turn 18, you become an adult. Okay, my kids I have twins, and they're both more than 18, but at 18, and they still aren't that much greater than 18, but they couldn't handle things, So you need to, if your child is able to do a power of attorney to you, you should have that done so that you can help manage financial affairs. And I'll come back to SSI in a second. The other thing that you need is a document that at least allows access to medical records under HIPAA, okay, if not a directive that allows you to make medical decisions, okay? But at 18, everybody know what HIPAA is? Okay, so, at 18, the healthcare providers aren't supposed to talk to you without permission. And it's hard to get permission if somebody's not, in a coma, hit by a bus, or unable to consent. Now, if you don't think your child has the ability cognitively to do those kinds of documents, then you need to talk to somebody in your area about guardianship. But it's just not fair to the child for you not to be able to access records, make financial decisions at 18. And so you need to make that pretty clear. Getting back to the SSI for a second, oftentimes a parent will serve as what's called the representative payee for the SSI recipient. And that's also, depending on the child's skill and experience, that's an important role because that controls the check. All right, so Chase, we have 29 minutes. I'm going to talk about the ABLE accounts for about 4 minutes, and then we're going to do questions, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
All right, so everybody know what ABLE accounts are? Okay, ABLE accounts, actually, the idea started right here in Arlington, Virginia, where parents of plain kids and disabled kids were sitting around and saying, well, how come our kids can have the kids without disabilities can have 529 plans for college, but the kids with disabilities can't? So after, 8 years of lobbying, Congress passed the ABLE account. which allows a person who's disabled before 26 to set up an account in which the earnings on the account are not taxed if they're used for qualified disability expenses. And qualified disability expenses are pretty much everything. They're good. I have some clients who use them, again, when I go back to my clients who have children with developmental disabilities, and they work at the food store, so they put some of their money, some of their earnings in an ABLE account. The couple of issues, one of the big issues is that you can only have one ABLE account, unlike 529 accounts where grandma, grandpa, mom and dad, Uncle Jim can set up accounts. And second, that the contributions per year in total can only be $14,000. So, occasionally people get a $10,000 inheritance and we can put those in ABLE accounts. But as a long-term vehicle to build up substantial assets, it's got some issues. Now there's some legislation pending, who knows what's going to happen, to allow such things as 529 plans to be converted to ABLE accounts. I don't know whether that's going to make it or not. If you live in this area, you become a little jaded about anything happening on Capitol Hill. Outside the Beltway, maybe people have different ideas. So ABLE accounts are useful, and depending on the child or the person's functioning level, it also allows that person some control over financial assets. So it's something to be considered, but currently it's not a solution to any of the problems. And I think I'm going to stop because we've got 25 minutes and do questions.
Okay. So, yeah.
You need to stand, and one of us will repeat your question. So, I promise.
I have three. Is there a cap on ABLE account, a total cap?
Yeah. Up to $100,000, there's no issue. After $100,000, SSI is suspended, but Medicaid is intact, and the cap is $300,000. And I should have said, is there a cap? Are there financial limits on ABLE accounts?
Second question, ABLE accounts are run through the states, so each state sort of sets the rules. Are they, what's the word, portable from state to state? How does that work?
Chase is
Yeah.
the ABLE expert, so.
So, yes, they are run state to state, and I will give a caveat. Every plan's a little different in terms of costs. So do your homework there. Investment expenses are a big deal. Yeah, there are, like I was meeting with a client on Friday who is a resident of DC. DC does not yet have an ABLE account. She likes the Tennessee program. She has some family in Tennessee. She's going to set up a Tennessee account for the time being until the DC account is up and running. If you live in the state which offers an ABLE account, there are tax benefits in many cases where you can get state tax deductions for making contributions, much like the way you get a deduction for making contributions to certain 529 accounts. Now, the legislation is still up in the air about whether you'd be able to roll 529 education assets into ABLE accounts. We're fighting this. I testified in support of ABLE to the Senate, and a lot of unfortunate negotiations had to be made to get it to pass through. So we're continuing to fight to make it as good as it can be.
Is it okay if I ask another?
You got the mic. So.
Okay. I have set up a special needs trust for my daughter. It is a third-party trust, so that means it's a revocable trust until my husband and I are deceased. Is that correct? That's what we were told. Okay, so the question is funding. Does it make, we have money stocked away, and we've been talking with a trust company to hold the assets for the Special Needs Trust. We haven't funded it yet. It's a trust on paper. Does it make sense to fund the trust and pay the fee for the trust company to oversee it, or does it make sense to wait?
Without talking about your individual situation, I don't suggest that people fund the trust before at least one parent dies, because why put it in a trust than to just write a check to, for occupational therapy, as an example. Second of all, the trust becomes a separate taxpayer. I don't do revocable special needs trusts, so I don't like that. The trust becomes a separate taxpayer, and then after $600 worth of income, the trust has to file a return. So most people are happy not to file another return.
That's the reason that we set it up, and in case there was a bequest, a grandparent bequest would go in
Yeah.
that, and it would be a separate
Right.
tax entity, but we were told not. Okay.
Right. If grandma and grandpa wants to fund it, take the money and deal with the hassle.
Just to, oh,
Does an able account affect the threshold of $2,000 for SSI?
No. So you can have up to $100,000 in there. It's not going to affect SSI until it goes over 100. If it goes over 100K, $733 a month is held in suspense. It's not terminated. Once it gets back under the $100,000 threshold, the income kicks back in.
But you don't get the back
Right.
Right.
$733.
yeah. Just two pieces of advice. When you remarry, make sure your spouse, your new spouse that comes into the family, updates the beneficiaries for life insurance or any kind of trust or anything, because we've been in a situation in which my brother's wife passed away and she did not update any of her life insurance or anything, so the life insurance was going to her ex-husband. So, and then also, if you set up a guardianship, yeah, she didn't do, yeah. And also, when you set up a guardianship, like we did for our daughter when she was younger, now she's 18, make sure if you do it, I was going to appoint my sister and her husband. Well, what would have happened if they got divorced? And then you have a guardianship of my sister and then her ex-husband. So think about that as those life stages go through.
Absolutely. And Chase talked about it. Beneficiary days, most people in the
Okay.
U.S., aside from their house, have most of their wealth in retirement accounts, and then there's life insurance. And, there was a case, again, from Virginia that went to the U.S. Supreme Court because there was a federal employee who got divorced, never changed his beneficiary designation. Virginia has a law that says if you've designated your spouse as a beneficiary of a life insurance policy and you get divorced, that designation is void, but not in the federal government. And the second wife lost. So, yeah, beneficiary designations. I have a client, I did a will. He never told me he had end-stage liver disease. He never mentioned that he had $1 million life insurance policy. He left it to his 2 minor children. The life insurance company does not pay to minor children. And we're trying to, they live in the District of Columbia, and the guardianship law there is literally 100 years old, so we're trying to figure out what to do. So beneficiary, if you take nothing else from this,
Yeah.
beneficiary designations are of crucial importance. And if you get remarried, get a prenup.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
If you're married, is there anything you can do? I have a disability and we're married. Is there anything you can do to get, since I don't work, my assets under $2,000, and is it ever considered me individually and my assets as far as Medicaid, SSI, other things that are based on income?
Well,
and assets.
Do you have a work, have you worked 40 quarters?
I get Social Security disability, yes.
Okay, so if you get SSDI, then
Yeah.
you're not going to get SSI.
Okay, this is the Medicaid application I filled out for the waiver program.
Right.
And then they said, once you get denied from Medicaid, then there's going to be, it's going to be cheaper to get care at home, someone come in to help me at home. So I didn't know in the future if there will be other programs and things that would have this income involved that I would want to participate in.
It depends where you live, but if you're on SSDI, you should also be getting, well, I don't know how long you've been on, but if you've been on more than 2 years, you're also getting Medicare, right?
Right, but they said to fill out the Medicaid application.
Right. And so, I don't do a lot of what's called community Medicaid planning. You need to find somebody in your area who does, because there's issues about spousal support that vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
So it's not something you come in contact with where spouses need, if you're already married, you need much, like a special needs trust or anything like that. It's
Yeah,
mostly if you have kids.
It depends on the state where you live.
Okay.
Because Medicaid's a joint federal and state program, but the eligibility is determined by the states.
What state are you in? Okay. Email me. I'd be happy to put you in touch with an attorney locally who would have better, just a pulse, a better pulse in that community.
Where in Pennsylvania?
South Central, York County.
York County?
Okay. So we'll try and help you out, get you a good contact there as well.
So as a young adult with a disability who is currently 23, I'm on my parents' insurance until 26. What are some things that I should be aware of or concerned about as far as insurance and financial planning as a young adult? What are some things to be aware of as next steps?
Yeah. Are you working or?
As of right now, yes, but I'll be in grad school soon, so I will not be working.
Okay.
And-
Go ahead.
Go ahead. You go.
Go ahead.
Are you going to be in grad school after you turn 26?
I'll be 25.
Okay. So under current law, you can stay on your parents' insurance till 26.
Right.
Most universities have a health plan, which may or may not be as good as your parents' plan. Under current law at 26, you're no longer covered, and they're either you're employed and your employer provides health care, or currently you have to go to the exchanges. So, not to go back to my sermon, but where do you live?
I live in Seattle, Washington.
Okay, well, you need to call Pat Murray and tell her to cut out to make the Republicans cut out the nonsense about
Right.
about pre-existing, because you. Not that I want to be political, but that's the reality. So either you get it through your employer, or you're in school, or you get it through the exchange.
Okay.
I have a large enough voice, I can probably do it.
Well, we want to do it for the recording.
So going back to the ABLE account, like my daughter's going to be going to the university, and this SSI is going to be income to her. If she doesn't need that income, she can just directly put that into an ABLE account every month, and it's not going to count against her.
Correct.
And the tax benefit is only off of the income generated from the ABLE account, not from any kind of donation to the ABLE account.
Yeah, so it works just like a 529 or a Roth account. It's funded with post-tax dollars. The money goes into the ABLE account, and then if it's invested, the gains come out free of taxes. The interest and dividends also free of taxes, as long as it comes out for a disability qualified expense, which is very broad.
So when we have to create an accountability of where her money goes, we just show an ABLE account and they go, doesn't count.
Correct.
Thank you.
Except if she's getting financial assistance, that might.
You mean?
I don't know. It depends on the FAFSA forms, and it depends on the individual school.
Hey. I'm sort of a dingus. I actually was late, so I would love to actually meet up with you guys after. So that's number one. And I just have a couple questions. But for somebody, let's say, who is a young adult who seemed to have missed these deadlines for certain able accounts and all these things, I guess, like, where's a good starting place to kind of, because right now, like, I'm focusing on my disability and then also supporting my family and some disabilities in there too.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of trying to, I'm actually doing a lot of the strategizing for myself and my family. And so I guess, like, where's a great starting point to begin this process?
Yeah. So
'Cause it's a lot.
You mentioned a deadline. The deadline for able accounts is age. So you have to be disabled before age 26. So that's a caveat. For starting points, I think, and you mentioned you have kids as well.
No kids, but I have parents and I'm who are disabled. So I'm
Okay.
thinking of that.
So I would, couple things. I would get your estate planning house in order, both for yourself, but also for your parents. So have that conversation with them. You can go with them to the meeting, maybe. Go to see an attorney who does special needs planning, who understands benefits locally. That's the first thing I would do. Second thing I would do is I would do some cash flow planning. You know, you're putting aside X amount of dollars. You're looking to do X, Y, and Z in terms of, you know, retirement or purchase a home. Maybe you're helping to provide for your parents. Whatever the case may be, you need to kind of get a sense as to where you currently stand relative to those financial goals. So to actually either do the calculation, there's some good calculators available, or go see a financial planner who can help walk you through what the long-term situation looks like from a cash flow perspective. And I would highly recommend you hire somebody who has experience working with individuals with disabilities, because most financial planners aren't going to know about able accounts and SSI
Right,
and
that's
Medicaid.
what I've been finding, actually. So it's just
Yeah.
kind of trying to isolate who that
Yep.
person is has actually been my biggest challenge.
Yep.
Because I have found people that have other niches, but like this is very, I think, very unique in comparison.
Yeah, and so I'm going to send a workbook out to everyone, which will help you start to prioritize your goals, and it's the workbook's specifically written for disability planning. And it'll help you prioritize some of these things. But I think legal is paramount, and then having a good sense as to where the ship is going. What does the future look like with your cash flow planning?
Sounds good, thank you.
Yep.
Look for me after.
Okay?
Just to define what you say on these able accounts, you say you have to be disabled under 26. So I'm obviously way over 26, but if you have a CMD, it's congenital, so it's from birth. How do you define disabled? Does it mean you have to be on disability?
So the rule says you have to have been diagnosed before age 26. So you could be, 30 years old and still have an able account as long as you were diagnosed before the age of 26.
Diagnosed as what? Like, for example, I was only diagnosed with a CMD at 39, but I had a muscle biopsy when I was 8. Then said I had muscle weakness, but I didn't have.
So then the
So I wouldn't qualify.
And then, so the qualification for being eligible is, similar to SSI. And if you have SSI or Medicaid, you're automatically going to qualify for an ABLE account. But yeah, the age 26, you have to have been diagnosed before the age of 26. And again, that was another arbitrary, ridiculous compromise that had to be made when the legislation went through.
Two pieces of advice, and one, you may correct me as a lawyer. How many of you have your bank account set up in a way that should you pass away, that account is paid upon death? Am I getting that right?
Payable on death, yeah.
Yes. So whoever's the trustee or of your estate or whatever will have access, but you can correct me on that.
I think, at least in some states, there's a problem with transfer on death or payable on death
Right.
to a non-human.
Yeah.
Okay,
But in our case, we want our daughter to have access to our accounts right away. So her name is on our bank accounts as paid upon death.
I understand that.
Yeah,
She's
right.
a person.
Right,
But
but-
you can't go to the trust.
Yeah, that's what I wanted you to clarify
Right,
for
right.
me.
So-
And then, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. What was your second point?
Yeah, and then how many of you are aware of the Social Security's compassionate allowance list? Yeah, yeah. Okay, some of you may want to look at that. It's called the Social Security Compassionate Allowance List. And I think the next time we're going to have this kind of conference, I would like to get someone in from Social Security to talk about this, the benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, that kind of thing. It's a way to fast track you to receive benefits for your children. And it's a list of diseases or conditions that allow you to sort of, I don't want to say jump the line, but get you going a little faster. Meaning that these diseases on this list, they understand that these diseases are very detrimental to the patient and to the family. And I'm happy to say that a couple years ago, I worked really hard to get the X-linked MTM on that list. So those boys, most of them are boys, are receiving those benefits now. But again, not every disease is on there. I know Ulrich's is on there, so that's one disease, and I want to work on that because we're now a spectrum. We're a spectrum. So when you see that, it's again the Social Security Compassionate Allowance List. You could say, hey, my kid has this specific disease. I'm on this list, or or my
That's
child.
a great point. Speaking of lists, are there any federal civilian employees here?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh. Are you planning on staying? Are you in the health program? Not. I'll talk to you afterwards. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, here we go. Mr. Bear.
So, would you recommend having a 529 education account and ABLE account? Can the ABLE account be used to help with any educational related expenses?
Yeah, an ABLE account can be used for education related expenses. There's a lot of confusion around how 529 accounts are or are not counted towards your means test. Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about 529s and how they really, it's sort of a misconception, but they actually, in most cases, aren't an accountable asset for purposes of qualifying for SSI and Medicaid. Because as a parent, you set it up and you're the participant, so it's technically not the child's asset.
So are there limits for the education account that go against SSI? And are there limits against the education account? Like you said in the ABLE account, once you go over $100,000, you then disqualify yourself from benefits. Is the same way with education?
Depending, if you've set it up as the participant, meaning you're in control of the account, it's not counted as the child's asset. So technically, the 529 account would not be a countable asset for purposes of qualifying for SSI.
Does that change when they're 18?
It does not. Now, if the kids set it up on their own, they set up their own 529 account and started putting dollars into it, that money would count against them.
Okay.
So you just need to be careful about how the 529 account is set up.
Go ahead. We'll repeat it.
Wait. Because we're recording this.
As a follow-up to my daughter's question about health care insurance as she approaches 26, first day of the conference, the question asked, what keeps you up at night? And it doesn't really keep me up at night, but I always wonder, should Obamacare go away, or should the current administration do away with Medicaid and pre-existing conditions? What I worry about is, how do we pay for health care when she's on her own, she's in college, she's past the age of 26 or just before 26, maybe is looking for a job, doesn't have the resources to pay or get her own insurance. What happens? And I know you guys, there's a lot of unknowns. I understand that. I'm asking you to speculate in your opinion what could happen down the road. How does her health care get taken care of?
If Medicaid goes away?
As we know it now.
Well,
if it goes away as we know it now.
Well, to be fair, nobody's talking about doing away with Medicaid completely. They're talking about cutting the growth. But if you're at 26 is a problem. It used to be a bigger problem at 22. So you get, if the exchanges go away, then it's really find a job with health care or go on Medicaid. Those are the two choices. I don't know whether the exchanges are going to go away. It's not, we don't have a solution. Okay, it's out of our hands. There's no good answer for that.
I just had a clarification for the question Daniela asked about how you would qualify and the eligibility requirements. I think we used the word diagnosis just to be a little more precise for this room in particular. You have to have age of onset before the age of 26. You can have been diagnosed afterwards, but as long as the doctor is certifying that it was like congenital or that it happened, that it started before that, you will qualify for the ABLE account. So I just wanted to clarify the language around that a little bit. And then the other question around the caps, I just know this because our family also looked into it. You become disqualified for SSI if you put more than $100,000 in, but there still is some benefit to doing that because you can still accrue and get the Medicaid benefit. But there is a cap to that as well, I think. We refer to it as 300,000. So that's just important to know is there is sort of that upper limit of 300,000 that you can put in. So I just want to clarify those two things.
It's important though, they will not allow you to put in more than $14,000 per year. So you can't take $100,000 in lump sum and put it into an ABLE account. That's where the special needs trust would come into play. You can put an unlimited money into a third-party special needs trust, and that money would not count towards qualifying for SSI and other means-tested benefits.
So in answer to your question about insuring your daughter, what we've done is when my daughter turned 18, we applied for SSI. She's in college. She may be able to work. She may not. But this is sort of my backup. She's on my insurance right now, and she has Medicaid as a secondary, which is really useful because my insurance doesn't pay for everything that she needs, and Medicaid will cover it. So this is sort of how I'm hedging my bet. I'm hopeful that she'll get a job and get her own insurance when she turns 26, but I'm hedging my bets. She has Medicaid now, so I can sleep at night knowing that. So can I suggest to them that you apply for SSI? You can get a benefit while you're in school, so you get a cash benefit. Think about it, yeah.
And I'll get to you. So yeah. You'll be the last one. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, I work for the Department of Defense for Navy. You were going to say something and you never finished.
Right.
What were you going to say?
So if you're a federal employee, If you're a federal employee and you participate in a health care plan, which most federal employees do, and you stay until you retire, and your child is disabled to a certain degree, then he or she can stay in the federal health plan for the rest of his or her life. If you look in the handbook, there's a section on child incapable of self-support. I didn't write it, I'm just telling you what it says. And you have to get the child certified. So I have a lot of clients who are federal employees who don't leave, even though they want to leave, because they need to retire and keep their child in the healthcare system. So that was worth the trip.
Does that apply to TRICARE also? Does that apply to
Yeah, I think TRICARE also. If you retire from the uniformed service.
Making special